April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above the steel gray skies of France. The air is razor-thin, the horizon stretched in infinite clarity. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermaken, a veteran of countless duels in his Foch, Wolf-Lindenu A5, peers through his canopy and smirks. Below him, American machines claw at the heavens, heavy, bloated silhouettes dragging themselves skyward with all the grace of overloaded wagons. He chuckles into his oxygen mask, calling them flying milk bottles. To German eyes, these hulking thunderbolts are a cosmic joke, a clumsy mistake the Reich will soon erase from the skies. What Hermaken does not yet know, what no German ace circling above can yet comprehend, is that on this morning, the Luftwaffe has already begun to lose the war. For what the Americans brought to France that day was not just a new fighter. It was a weapon designed to annihilate the Luftwaffe from the inside out. 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group strain against the sky, their engines roaring with the fury of caged beasts. Each machine is powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower, fed by a monstrous turbo supercharger that pumps sea-level performance into the stratosphere. To German pilots accustomed to slicing duels with Spitfires and Messerschmitts, the P-47 looks absurd, a barrel-shaped fuselage capped with a greenhouse canopy, stubby wings spread too short for its swollen body, and a 4-blade propeller the size of a windmill. It looks more like a flying brewery keg than a precision instrument of war. But within its wings lie 8 Browning, 50-caliber machine guns, 400 rounds in total, capable of unleashing 6,000 rounds per minute. A single burst can saw a fighter in half. The Germans see only bulk and awkwardness. The Americans see the future. Leading the squadron that morning is Major Donald Blakesley, a man who had already earned his reputation flying Spitfires with the RAF Eagle squadrons. Now commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, he knows what his green pilots do not. That the Thunderbolt is no ordinary fighter. It is a paradigm shift. While German aircraft are optimized for nimbleness, the P-47 is built as a fortress in motion. Its doctrine demands new tactics, hit-and-run slashing dives, altitude dominance, and firepower so overwhelming that the enemy cannot recover. As the German formation closes in, Blakesley's calm voice cuts across the radio. Stay high. Don't turn. Use your speed. Use your guns. Below, American pilots tense, their hands gripping the throttles of machines that feel more like locomotives than fighters. They are about to learn in fire and blood what their new mounts can truly do. The first attack comes fast. A swarm of Foch, Wolf slashes upward, guns blazing, aiming to drag the Americans into a turning fight they cannot win. The P-47s lurch and struggle to respond. Their massive frames resist sharp maneuvers, their wings groan under the strain. One Thunderbolt peels away, riddled with cannon shells, smoke trailing from its radial engine. The Germans cheer, but then something strange happens. The crippled Jug refuses to die. It absorbs round after round, its thick armor and radial cylinders shrugging off punishment that would have shattered a Messerschmitt in an instant. The American pilot steadies his machine, rolls inverted, and dives. Gravity joins horsepower, and suddenly the Thunderbolt becomes a meteor. At 500 miles per hour it streaks through the formation, 8 Brownings blazing. A Foch, Wolf bursts into flames, torn apart in midair. The Germans, stunned, realize they are facing a beast unlike anything they have fought before. In those first chaotic minutes, the legend of the Thunderbolt begins. Yes, it cannot turn with a Messerschmitt. Yes, it climbs like a cow in mud. But what it can do is far more terrifying. It can take unimaginable punishment, dive faster than any fighter in Europe, and deliver a storm of lead that no pilot can hope to dodge. For the Americans, this realization is a lifeline. For the Germans, it is the first taste of doom. What began with laughter, mockery of flying milk bottles, now carries the sour edge of fear. Because the Luftwaffe, for all its skill and experience, has never faced an enemy that rewrites the very rules of aerial combat. And on April 8, 1943, they discover that the joke has ended. The war in the skies has changed forever. To understand why the P-47 was unlike anything the world had seen, we must rewind to June 1940. France had fallen, Britain stood alone, and German fighters seemed invincible. The U.S. Army Air Corps, terrified of being outclassed before even entering the war, sent an urgent request to Republic Aviation: build us a high-altitude interceptor that can crush the Luftwaffe. Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian-born genius of aircraft design, looked at the specifications and laughed. What the army wanted simply didn't exist. Instead, he proposed something outrageous: a monster with a massive turbo supercharger, thicker armor than a tank, and an engine so powerful it seemed impossible to mount on wings. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." His team went to work, forging the prototype P-47B. When it first took to the skies on May 6, 1941, test pilots stared in disbelief at nearly 10,000 pounds empty. It weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. But once airborne, the dinosaur roared. At the heart of the beast was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine delivering 2,000 horsepower. Fed by the revolutionary turbo supercharger, it could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where most engines gasped for air. For the first time, America had a fighter that could dominate at stratospheric altitudes. Pilots were stunned by the sheer force of it. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, destined to become one of America's greatest aces with 27 kills, described his first flight: "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. Yet the power came at a price." The P-47 was unforgiving. On takeoff, its torque could flip careless pilots into the dirt. On landing, it ground-looped with brutal indifference. In a dive, it plummeted so fast that shockwaves locked the controls solid, an early taste of compressibility. Training claimed lives. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the 56 Fighter Group alone lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft without ever seeing a German. By spring 1943, the Thunderbolt was finally ready for combat, but readiness on paper is not the same as readiness in the sky. The Luftwaffe had been fighting for 4 relentless years. Its pilots were hardened killers with hundreds of missions. By contrast, the Americans arriving in England were rookies. They flew into combat in an aircraft that was heavy, alien, and largely untested in real battle. The first encounters seemed to prove German superiority beyond doubt. The Thunderbolt couldn't out-turn a Foch Wolf 190. It couldn't out-climb a Messerschmitt 109. In its first month of combat, American groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for just 3 confirmed German kills. 2 Luftwaffe aces like Joseph Pips Priller. It was confirmation of their mockery. He reported back after his first encounter: "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow." German pilots laughed. The RAF snickered. But hidden beneath these early defeats was a deadly truth no one yet realized. The P-47's secret wasn't in agility. It was in brute force. In those early dogfights, downed Thunderbolts revealed something terrifying to German intelligence officers. Examining the wrecks, these machines could absorb absurd amounts of punishment. One P-47 returned on May 4, 1943 with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes in its fuselage. Yet it landed safely, its pilot shaken but alive. The massive radial engine, with no fragile coolant lines, kept running after hits that would have killed a Merlin, powered Spitfire or Messerschmitt instantly. The armor around the cockpit shielded pilots from shrapnel and fire, and when the Thunderbolt did manage to line up its guns, the results were devastating. 8 .50 caliber Brownings tore apart anything in their path, leaving no room for survival. German pilots began to notice when the Americans didn't try to turn, when they fought on their own terms. Diving, slashing, and climbing back to altitude, they were nearly unstoppable. The real shift came not from design, but from doctrine. Blakesley and other veterans drilled it into their men: don't dogfight. Don't turn, stay high, hit hard, and climb away. It was a complete rejection of how fighter combat had been imagined for decades. Instead of nimble duels, Thunderbolt pilots became aerial predators, using altitude and mass like hawks striking down on prey. They didn't have to outturn the enemy, they only had to outshoot them. By summer 1943, the statistics were reversing. Luftwaffe pilots who laughed at the flying milk bottles were now dying in fiery wrecks. For the first time since 1939, German dominance in the air was being challenged. The Americans had found their stride, and the Thunderbolt, once a joke, was beginning its transformation into a legend. The laughter of April had already turned to unease. Soon, by late summer of 1943, the skies over occupied Europe were turning into a war of attrition. And this was where the Thunderbolt's design philosophy revealed its genius. The Luftwaffe still had better climbers and turners, but the P-47 was built for survival. While a German ace might score a victory by crippling a Thunderbolt, that crippled machine often limped back across the channel, repaired and flying again within weeks. The pilot, protected by armor and radial redundancy, usually survived to fight another day. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, was bleeding irreplaceable talent. Every downed Messerschmitt was often the loss of a veteran with years of experience. Men trained in Poland, France, and the Battle of Britain, Germany could not afford to replace them. America, with its endless factories and training pipelines, could. The Thunderbolt did not need to win every duel. It only needed to survive, and in surviving, it doomed the Luftwaffe. Within months, the P-47 began producing legends. Robert S. Johnson, who once doubted the Jug, returned from missions with his aircraft shredded, but still flying, each battle adding to his tally until he became one of the U.S. first great aces of the European War. His accounts of the Thunderbolt's durability bordered on myth. In one famous incident, Johnson's P-47 was hit over a dozen times by cannon shells, controls mangled, canopy jammed, fuel tanks ruptured. A Focke-Wulf 190 made repeated passes trying to finish him, yet the Jug simply refused to die. Johnson limped home across the channel, landing a wreck that should have been scrap metal. Stories like his spread through squadrons, giving rookies confidence. The P-47 was not just a machine, it was a shield, a guardian that gave pilots a fighting chance. For the Luftwaffe, this was terrifying. No matter how hard they struck, these Americans kept coming back. The true revolution came when American commanders realized the Thunderbolt's potential beyond simple air combat. At first, the P-47's role was escorting bombers, protecting them from interception. But as U.S. bomber streams pushed deeper into Germany, range became critical. With external fuel tanks, the Thunderbolt extended its reach, and suddenly entire squadrons of Jugs could accompany flying fortresses and liberators all the way into the Reich. The Luftwaffe, once confident in intercepting bombers beyond Allied fighter cover, now found American escorts waiting for them over Berlin and Bremen. The equation had changed. The Luftwaffe could not touch the bombers without bleeding fighters, and they could not bleed fighters without sacrificing the defense of the Reich. The Thunderbolt was strangling Germany's air war before the P-51 Mustang even arrived to finish the job. But the Thunderbolt's transformation was not limited to the skies. Pilots soon discovered that its armor, firepower, and dive speed made it the perfect ground attack weapon. When equipped with bombs and rockets, the Jug became a flying artillery piece, pounding German convoys, trains, and tanks with merciless efficiency. The same 8 Brownings that shredded fighters could rip apart columns of trucks or infantry caught in the open. German soldiers gave it a name whispered with dread. Der Gabelschwanzteufel was reserved for the P-38, but for the Thunderbolt, frontline troops simply called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. And Juggernaut it was. By 1944, the P-47 had shifted from mocked heavyweight to a symbol of American industrial ferocity, crushing opposition not through elegance, but through unstoppable power. To fight the Jug was to face inevitability. The cumulative effect was devastating. Every time the Luftwaffe rose to meet Allied bombers, they were met by waves of Thunderbolts. Even if German pilots scored kills, they could not stop the attrition. Factories in America were producing P-47s faster than Germany could shoot them down. Factories in Germany, meanwhile, were being bombed to rubble under the very cover those Thunderbolts provided. It was an industrial equation the Luftwaffe could never solve. By late 1943, the German fighter force was bleeding out. The laughter that once mocked the flying milk bottles had died completely. In its place grew desperation, as pilots whispered about the unstoppable American machine that could dive faster, hit harder, and survive longer than anything they had ever fought. The P-47 was not just a plane, it was a prophecy of Germany's defeat, written in smoke and fire across the skies of Europe. By early 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces had unleashed the full weight of American industry. Thunderbolts poured into England by the hundreds, filling airfields across the countryside with their hulking silhouettes. Entire groups were now equipped with P-47s, each squadron a wall of steel and firepower waiting to be unleashed. When massed together, they created a new form of aerial warfare, one based not on individual duels between knights of the sky, but on overwhelming formations that fought as a single organism. Each pilot knew he was part of something bigger, something industrial in scale. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, was shrinking. Every mission cost them more irreplaceable veterans, while replacements fresh from flight schools died within weeks. The sky no longer belonged to the hunter aces of 1940. It belonged to the juggernauts of 1944. Those once inexperienced American rookies, mocked in 1943, were becoming hardened killers themselves. Major Gabi Gabreski, a son of Polish immigrants, would score 28 victories in his Thunderbolt. Francis, Gabi, Johnson, David Schilling, and countless others turned the Jug into a legend. They didn't fight like the Germans, who glorified individual ace tallies. They fought like teams, covering one another, overwhelming the enemy with disciplined coordination. Each kill mattered less than the mission, keeping the bombers alive, strangling the Luftwaffe, breaking Germany's ability to resist. By the time these pilots earned their ace status, their reputation preceded them. German radio chatter reflected the growing fear. Achtung, Thunderbolts. It was no longer laughter but alarm. To face the Jug was to face death. On the ground, the Thunderbolt's reputation grew darker still. By mid-1944, the P-47 had become the nightmare of German soldiers retreating across Europe. Strafing runs annihilated convoys, shredded trains, and obliterated armored columns. Each dive sent streams of tracers carving across roads, leaving wreckage in flames. Pilots strapped bombs under their wings, turning the Jug into a heavy bomber in miniature, then followed with rockets that could shatter even Tiger tanks. Soldiers who once mocked the fat American plane now dove for cover at the first howl of its engine. Survivors described the sound of incoming Jugs as a herald of doom, a mechanical scream that promised only destruction. On D-Day and beyond, the Thunderbolt became as vital to ground forces as artillery, softening defenses and erasing resistance. The Jug had evolved from aerial escort to angel of death. By the autumn of 1944, the Luftwaffe was broken. Its once proud Jagdgeschwader squadrons were reduced to shadows, filled with teenagers barely able to land their aircraft. Against them stood swarms of American Thunderbolts and the newer P-51 Mustangs. Together they owned the sky. Bombers flew deep into the heart of Germany, almost unopposed, reducing cities and factories to ruins. For German pilots who once scoffed at the Jug, the memory of those early encounters had soared into bitter regret. The machine they mocked as a milk bottle had helped destroy their entire air force. When the Allies crossed the Rhine, Thunderbolts prowled overhead, striking anything that moved. By then, the Luftwaffe was no longer a threat. It was a memory, a casualty of industrial logic and American persistence. And at the center of that destruction stood the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. When the war ended, the P-47's record spoke for itself. Over 15,000 were built, more than any other American fighter of the war. They destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft in the air and tens of thousands of vehicles, trains, and tanks on the ground. They turned green American pilots into legends, and they ground the Luftwaffe into dust. But beyond the numbers, the Thunderbolt proved something deeper, that wars are not always won by elegance or agility, but by resilience, firepower, and sheer industrial will. What began as a laughingstock, a flying milk bottle, became a symbol of inevitability, a machine that embodied the unstoppable advance of the United States in World War II. To the men who flew it, the Jug was more than an aircraft. It was survival. It was vengeance. It was victory. And to the Germans who once mocked it, it was the last sound they ever heard in the skies over Europe.